particularly their religious wars. America now stands as an abject loser in the Israel-Hezbollah conflict, the Israel-Palestine war, and the economic strangling of Hamas. Indeed, America is in part losing to the Islamists because of its absolute backing of Israel and the blind eye it turns to the Saudis' blatant and aggressive jihad spreading. America must withdraw from this savagery. No important aspect of American life or security would be negatively impacted if Israel, Palestine, or both disappeared tomorrow. And we are tied to the Saudi tyranny only because of the cowardice of U.S. politicians. Americans must also reject their political class's patently absurd contention that U.S. and Israeli national interests are identical. America is now shedding blood and treasure because our country's Israel-first citizens and their journals, men like Feith and Wolfowitz, Podhoretz and Hansen and Woolsey, and journals like the Weekly Standard, the National Review, Commentary, and the Wall Street Journal. These men and their journals provoked a hubristic war based on the idiot idea that a state could be created in Muslim Iraq that was not anti-Israeli. These men severely and permanently compromised Israel's security from the moment the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq began. Moreover, it is not a fixable situation, because a potentially pro-Israel regime in Iraq exists only in the ahistorical and fervent imaginings of U.S. citizen Israeli firsters, who are, when all is said and done, Israel's worst and most lethal enemies. The cost of unqualified U.S. support for Israel has heretofore been measured in the expenditures of dollars and political capital, and as such has been acquiesced in or ignored by Americans, inured to their government's prodigal waste of national assets. We have now transitioned into a situation where the cost of such support for Israel is being measured in the blood and lives of the children of American parents. The cost will quickly become obvious, abhorrent, and utterly acceptable to those parents. We must force the Congress to end its supine abdication to the executive of its sole power to declare war by electing representatives pledged to restoring constitutionality and therefore sanity to our war-making process. Infamously, no Congress has declared war since December 8, 1941, and yet we have repeatedly seen the American people dragged into wars because one man and his advisors have decided it is the right thing to do. Resolutions allowing the president to use military force offensively are cowardly acts that surrender constitutional prerogatives in a manner that allows senators and congressmen to have it both ways. They can applaud the troops if the war goes well, or they can snipe at and undermine the president if the war goes belly up. Our post-war history is littered with failed wars that were initiated by the president and which divided Americans amongst themselves. Perhaps the restoration of the founders' intent on the issue of war-making will allow us both to win the few wars we need to fight overseas and to not wage war against each other at home. Finally, and most important, we must stop trying to spread democracy abroad by military, financial, humanitarian, or political intervention. No young American should die for the insane goal of giving the people of Iraq a possibility of embracing democracy, a phrase used ad infinitum by President Bush and other Western leaders. No small R Republican government like ours has the right to spend the lives of its young in military crusades for such patently unobtainable abstractions as giving liberty, justice, and democracy to foreigners. U.S. foreign policy must revert to what it was before the historical anomaly called the Cold War gave license to U.S. politicians to become democracy-mongering interventionists. Foreign policy defends who we are. It does not and cannot define who we are. Foreign policy need do only one thing: protect America so as to allow the domestic expansion of liberty, freedom, and the equality of conditions. Sir? Oh. Is there a doctor in the house? I'm sorry, somebody's fainted. Is there a medical doctor? If no additional foreigner ever votes in an election, America would be no worse off. Washington's efforts to build democracies abroad has a track record of making America less safe, not more safe. And, if I may ask, is there a better definition of pure waste than spending the lives of our Marines or soldiers so Mrs. Mohammed can vote in an Iraqi or Afghan election? The post-war democracy crusading of U.S. administrations has impoverished us in the treasure, blood, domestic political unity, and what has been called the rightful influence of our Republican example. We must return to the founders' goal for America, to be the well-wisher of freedom and independence for all, but the champion and vindicator only of our own. In closing, let me urge that none of us lose heart or fall prey to despair. Though the dangers that confront our republic are many and dire, the future of America, as always, is in the hands of Americans. All of those in attendance here today, and the millions more listening or watching across this broad land, know that the greatest danger America faces comes not from China, or from Russia, or from global warming, or from Islamic extremism, but rather it comes from the members of our own bipartisan governing class. There is not a nickel's worth of difference between President Bush and former President Clinton, between Senator McCain and Senator Obama, between Speaker Pelosi and Mayor Giuliani, or between any of the foregoing and their pro-empire Israeli-first cheerleaders at the Council of Foreign Relations, the National Endowment for Democracy, and the American Israel Political Action Committee. They are all rank and reckless interventionists, bent on involving in America in other people's wars and content to see our republic destroyed by their ego-building, democracy-crusading adventures overseas. The greatest danger to the republic lies in the imperial ambitions of these men and women. They are a mortal threat to the American people and all they have built here in North America over the last 232 years. And no one, may I say, has done more to alert his countrymen to this danger than the soft-spoken gentleman from Texas, Dr. Ron Paul.